Picture this. You're deep in hostile territory, exhausted beyond measure, when suddenly your high-tech military equipment starts revealing horrors that shouldn't exist. What happens when cutting-edge warfare technology accidentally opens a window into realms we were never meant to see? Today we're diving into one of the most disturbing military experiments ever conducted, a story that connects Victorian-era mysticism with modern warfare, toxic chemicals with supernatural encounters, and scientific curiosity with absolute terror. This isn't just another ghost story. This is about what happens when humanity's quest for military dominance accidentally tears open doorways we never intended to breach. Our journey begins in the fog-shrouded streets of London, over a century ago, where a respected physician was about to stumble upon something that would eventually haunt soldiers in a jungle halfway around the world. Dr. Walter Kilner wasn't your typical Victorian gentleman obsessed with seances and spirit photography. This man was serious science, head of electrotherapy at the prestigious St. Thomas's Hospital throughout the 1880s. Kilner represented the cutting edge of medical technology. While most doctors were still bleeding patients with leeches, he was harnessing electricity to heal the human body. His research papers filled academic journals, and his colleagues respected him as a pioneer in electromagnetic medicine. But it was precisely this expertise with invisible forces that led him down a path no respectable scientist should have traveled. The turning point came when Kilner encountered the work of Dr. Carl Ludwig von Reichenbach, a German chemist whose theories bridged the gap between hard science and mystical speculation. Reichenbach proposed that all living beings emit what he called the odic force, an invisible energy field that surrounds every person like an electromagnetic signature of life itself. Most scientists dismiss this as pseudoscientific nonsense, but Kilner saw potential. After all, medicine had already proven that the human body runs on electrical currents. Every heartbeat, every thought, every muscle contraction depends on bioelectricity flowing through our nervous system. If this energy exists internally, why couldn't it extend beyond our physical boundaries? Kilner became obsessed with making the invisible visible. Working late into London's perpetually gloomy nights, he experimented with different combinations of chemicals and glass filters, searching for the perfect formula that would reveal these hypothetical energy fields to human eyes. The breakthrough came through painstaking trial and error with what Kilner called his aura screens, specially treated glass plates that filtered specific wavelengths of light. Most attempts yielded nothing but disappointment and eye strain. But then Kilner discovered dianin, a coal tar derivative that photographers use to make their plates sensitive to infrared light. When applied to glass screens, dianin created an intense blue filter that seemed to strip away normal visual information while amplifying something else entirely. Looking through these modified lenses, Kilner claimed to observe something extraordinary surrounding human subjects, a faint luminous emanation that extended several inches from the body. These weren't just random patches of light. According to Kilner's meticulous observations, these energy fields had structure and meaning. He identified three distinct layers: an inner aura close to the skin, an outer aura extending further into space, and what he termed the etheric double, a ghostly outline that seemed to mirror the person's physical form. More fascinating still, these emanations appeared to change based on the subject's emotional state and physical health. Sick people showed dimmer, more fragmented auras. Strong emotions caused the fields to pulse and shift. It was as if Kilner had discovered a visual representation of the human soul itself. But there was a terrible price for this revelation. The dianin compound wasn't just toxic, it was devastatingly harmful to human vision. Prolonged exposure caused excruciating eye pain, severe headaches, and permanent vision damage. Kilner realized he'd created a window into another realm, but looking through it would eventually blind anyone brave or foolish enough to try. When Kilner published The Human Atmosphere in 1911, the scientific establishment responded with skepticism, bordering on ridicule. The British Medical Journal dismissed his findings as optical illusions created by eye strain and wishful thinking. Other researchers who attempted to replicate his experiments reported no unusual observations whatsoever. Kilner found himself increasingly isolated from mainstream science. His health began declining, possibly from his own exposure to dianin fumes, and he lacked the energy to defend his work against mounting criticism. When he died in 1920, most of the academic world breathed a sigh of relief that this embarrassing chapter in medical history had finally closed. But Kilner's research didn't disappear entirely. Certain individuals and organizations maintained quiet interest in his discoveries, particularly those involved in military technology development. If modified optics could genuinely reveal hidden aspects of the electromagnetic spectrum, the potential applications for warfare were enormous. The concept wasn't entirely far-fetched. Science had already proven that invisible forms of radiation existed all around us: radio waves, X-rays, gamma radiation, infrared heat signatures. Human eyes can only perceive a tiny sliver of the electromagnetic spectrum, roughly equivalent to one octave on a piano that spans dozens of octaves. What if enemy soldiers, hidden weapons, or battlefield hazards became visible through the right kind of optical enhancement? As global tensions escalated through the early 20th century, military researchers began exploring every possible technological advantage. Kilner's toxic blue goggles represented one potential avenue of investigation, even if the official scientific community had written them off as worthless. Fast forward 5 decades to the humid jungles of Southeast Asia, where American military forces faced their most challenging adversary yet, an enemy that seemed to vanish into thin air the moment darkness fell. The Viet Cong and North Vietnamese army had mastered guerrilla warfare tactics that turned night into their greatest weapon. During daylight hours, American air superiority made large-scale enemy movements suicidal. Helicopters could spot troop concentrations from miles away, calling in devastating airstrikes that pulverized anything caught in the open. But when the sun disappeared behind the jungle canopy, the tables turned completely. Under cover of darkness, Vietnamese fighters emerged from hidden tunnels and camouflaged bunkers to launch coordinated attacks on isolated American positions. They moved supplies along jungle trails, positioned mortar teams within striking distance of major bases, and melted back into the landscape before dawn revealed their locations to prowling aircraft. American soldiers found themselves trapped in heavily fortified compounds, knowing that hostile forces surrounded them every night but unable to engage an enemy they couldn't see. It was psychological warfare at its most effective, creating constant anxiety and paranoia among troops who never knew when or where the next attack would come. Military commanders desperately needed technological solutions to this tactical nightmare. If American forces could see in the dark as effectively as their enemies moved through it, the entire strategic balance would shift. Night vision technology became a top research priority, with massive funding directed toward creating portable optical devices that would restore American dominance after sunset. The first attempts used infrared searchlights paired with special viewing scopes, essentially giant flashlights that illuminated targets with invisible radiation. But these systems were bulky, power-hungry, and completely impractical for mobile operations. Worse, they betrayed the user's position to anyone else equipped with infrared detection equipment. The breakthrough came with development of image intensification technology, which amplified existing ambient light instead of requiring artificial illumination. The ANPVS-2 Starlight Scope represented a quantum leap in night vision capability, allowing soldiers to see clearly using only moonlight and starlight for illumination. However, early field testing revealed unexpected problems with this revolutionary technology. The Starlight Scope displayed everything in an eerie green phosphorescent glow that made the world look like something from another dimension. Soldiers reported that prolonged use created severe eye strain, disorientation, and disturbing psychological effects. More troubling were reports of hallucinations and false target identification. Exhausted soldiers staring through green-tinted scopes for hours on end began seeing enemy fighters that didn't exist, supernatural creatures moving through the jungle, and landscapes that seemed to pulse with malevolent life. One documented case involved a medic who spent an entire night monitoring what appeared to be hundreds of enemy corpses scattered across a battlefield, only to discover at sunrise that he'd been staring at empty ground. Another soldier described the green world visible through his scope as constantly moving and shifting, like a living nightmare that never remained stable. The psychological toll was severe enough that some units restricted night vision use to prevent complete mental breakdowns among their troops. But if standard green-spectrum night vision caused such problems, what would happen with more exotic optical modifications? According to testimony that surfaced decades later, certain military research units were simultaneously exploring alternative approaches to night vision technology. The account comes from Cliff H., whose father commanded an experimental technology unit during multiple Vietnam deployments between 1965 Unlike the documented development of green-spectrum night vision, this alleged program focused on red-filtered optics. The theoretical advantages were compelling. Red light doesn't destroy natural night vision the way other colors do, allowing users to maintain some ability to see without the device. Additionally, red illumination is less visible to enemy observers than white light or infrared beams. But according to Cliff's account, these experimental goggles incorporated something far more dangerous than simple red filters. Drawing on research that traced back to Walter Kilner's Victorian experiments, the prototype devices allegedly used dianin-treated lenses to enhance their perception capabilities. The combination seemed logical from a research perspective. If Kilner's toxic compound could reveal invisible energy fields around living beings, military applications were obvious. Soldiers wearing dianin-enhanced optics might be able to spot hidden enemies by their electromagnetic signatures, detect booby traps through unusual energy patterns, or identify safe pathways through contaminated areas. What they got instead was something far more terrifying than anyone had anticipated. The initial field test took place during what should have been a routine helicopter mission over peaceful South Vietnamese countryside. A small squadron of aircraft was conducting equipment evaluation flights, with selected door gunners equipped with the experimental red spectrum goggles. Everything proceeded normally until they reached cruising altitude over the target area. Suddenly, without warning or radio communication, one of the door gunners opened fire with his .50 caliber machine gun, not toward the ground, but wildly into empty air beside their aircraft. The other helicopters in the formation scattered desperately to avoid being hit by the unexpected barrage of heavy machine gun fire. Radio channels erupted with confused demands for explanation, as pilots struggled to maintain formation while avoiding friendly fire from their own escort. Cliff's father, serving as mission commander in the lead aircraft, immediately moved to physically restrain the gunner and determine what had triggered this dangerous outburst. When he pulled the experimental goggles away from the soldier's face, he found a man in absolute terror, eyes wide with panic, hands shaking uncontrollably, completely convinced that he'd been defending their aircraft from imminent attack. The gunner's explanation defied all logical understanding. Through the red-tinted lenses, he claimed to see winged creatures flying alongside their helicopter formation, demonic entities with claws and grotesque faces that seemed fully aware of his presence. These beings weren't just passive observations, they were actively gesturing toward him, pointing and beckoning as if trying to lure him toward some terrible fate. The soldier was convinced these creatures intended to board their aircraft or somehow drag him out of the helicopter, which is why he'd opened fire in self-defense. To him, the threat was absolutely real and immediately dangerous. The fact that nobody else could see these entities without the goggles only increased his terror and confusion. This incident wasn't isolated. Over the following weeks, as testing continued despite growing concerns, similar reports emerged from other crew members using the experimental optics. The descriptions remained remarkably consistent: winged humanoid creatures, demonic faces, clawed appendages, and behaviors that suggested intelligent awareness of the human observers. Some soldiers reported seeing these entities emerging from the jungle canopy, leaping between treetops with impossible agility. Others described encounters with beings that seemed to materialize from thin air, hover near their aircraft for several minutes, then vanish without trace. In every case, removing the red goggles immediately caused the apparitions to disappear, leaving only normal jungle landscape visible to naked eyes. The psychological impact on the test subjects became increasingly severe. Men who had previously shown no signs of mental instability began experiencing panic attacks, insomnia, and persistent anxiety about using the experimental equipment. Some refused to wear the goggles at all, claiming they'd rather face enemy ground fire than confront whatever horrors the red lenses revealed. Unit morale plummeted as word spread about the disturbing side effects of the new technology. Soldiers began requesting transfers out of the experimental program, and those who remained showed signs of severe stress that affected their combat effectiveness and decision-making abilities. Desperate to understand what was happening to his men, Cliff's father decided to test the experimental goggles himself. As a career military officer with multiple combat deployments, he'd seen enough genuine horrors of war to maintain perspective on whatever psychological effects might be influencing his troops. The experience left him permanently shaken. Through the crimson-tinted lenses, the familiar jungle landscape around their base camp transformed into something resembling a medieval vision of hell itself. The normal green vegetation took on ominous red hues that made everything appear to be bathed in blood or fire. But the landscape changes were nothing compared to the entities he observed moving through this hellish environment. Winged creatures with distinctly non-human proportions leaped from tree to tree around the perimeter of their position. These beings moved with predatory intelligence, studying the human installation as if planning some form of coordinated attack. Most disturbing was their apparent awareness of his observation. When he focused on particular entities through the goggles, they would turn toward him and make gestures that seemed deliberately communicative, pointing, beckoning, or making throat-cutting motions that needed no translation across species barriers. The moment he removed the experimental optics, this entire supernatural ecosystem vanished completely. The jungle returned to its normal appearance, with only wisps of evening fog drifting between empty trees, no creatures, no movement, no signs that anything unusual had ever been present. This personal experience convinced him that whatever the red goggles were revealing, it posed an unacceptable risk to military personnel. The technology might have legitimate scientific applications, but its psychological effects made it completely unsuitable for combat operations. Within 60 days of the initial testing phase, the entire experimental program was quietly terminated. Official records likely attributed the cancellation to technical difficulties or budget constraints, with no mention of the supernatural encounters that had traumatized multiple test subjects. The decision to end the program reflected military pragmatism rather than any official acknowledgement of paranormal phenomena. Regardless of whether the red goggles revealed genuine supernatural entities or simply caused elaborate hallucinations, the end result was the same. Soldiers became combat ineffective and psychologically unstable after using the equipment. From a command perspective, the cause mattered less than the effect. Military operations depend on troops who can function reliably under extreme stress, make rational decisions in life-or-death situations, and maintain unit cohesion during extended deployments. Equipment that undermined these essential capabilities had no place in combat operations, regardless of its potential advantages. The participating soldiers were likely debriefed with strict instructions to maintain operational security about their experiences. Military careers depend on maintaining reputations for mental stability and reliable judgment. Personnel who reported seeing demons through experimental equipment would face immediate questions about their fitness for continued service. While the red spectrum goggles remain unverified through official sources, extensive documentation exists regarding similar psychological problems with standard night vision equipment used throughout the Vietnam conflict. Even the green-tinted starlight scopes caused severe mental distress among troops who used them extensively. Military medical records from the era describe widespread reports of hallucinations, false target identification, and supernatural encounters among soldiers using night vision devices. The combination of extreme fatigue, combat stress, toxic chemical exposure, and pharmaceutical stimulants created conditions where the boundaries between reality and imagination became dangerously blurred. Dr. Richard Ruth's comprehensive research on Vietnam-era night vision technology, published by the U.S. Naval Academy in 2017, documents numerous cases of soldiers reporting supernatural encounters through their optical devices. The eerie green world, visible through early image intensification systems, created an otherworldly environment that human brains struggled to process normally. One particularly disturbing case involved a soldier who spent hours monitoring what appeared to be a massive enemy troop concentration through his starlight scope, calling in artillery strikes and air support to engage the hostile forces. At dawn, investigation revealed that he'd been firing at empty jungle for most of the night, having hallucinated an entire army that existed only in his scope's green-tinted display. Another documented incident describes a reconnaissance team that spent 3 days stalking what they believed was an enemy patrol, maintaining visual contact through their night vision equipment, and reporting regular updates on enemy positions and activities. When backup forces arrived to assist with the engagement, they found the reconnaissance team scattered across several miles of jungle, each member having followed different hallucinations that led them away from their actual mission objectives. Understanding why night vision devices cause such severe psychological problems requires examining how human vision normally functions and what happens when that system gets artificially modified. Our eyes evolved to process specific wavelengths of electromagnetic radiation under particular lighting conditions. Night vision technology forces the visual system to operate far outside its normal parameters. The green phosphorescent display created by image intensification systems doesn't correspond to anything in natural human experience. We never evolved to see the world bathed in monochromatic green light, which is why prolonged exposure creates such profound disorientation and perceptual distortion. Additionally, night vision devices compress the normal depth and contrast information that our brains use to interpret three-dimensional space. Objects at different distances appear flattened into a single plane, making it difficult to judge spatial relationships or movement patterns accurately. This visual confusion can cause stationary objects to appear mobile or create the impression of movement where none exists. Sleep deprivation compounds these problems exponentially. Soldiers operating on minimal rest for extended periods already experience degraded cognitive function and increased susceptibility to hallucinations. Adding the perceptual challenges of night vision technology creates a perfect storm of sensory confusion that can trigger complete breaks from reality. The toxic effects of chemical compounds like dianin would have multiplied these problems dramatically. Neurological damage from chemical exposure could cause permanent changes in visual processing, creating persistent hallucinations that continue even without the triggering device. Some researchers propose that modified optical devices might genuinely allow perception of electromagnetic phenomena normally invisible to human vision. This theory suggests that spiritual entities, interdimensional beings, or energy-based life forms could exist within specific wavelengths of radiation that our natural senses cannot detect. If such entities do exist, devices like Kilner's dianin-treated goggles or the alleged red-spectrum military prototypes might function as windows into these normally hidden realms. The terrifying encounters reported by users could represent genuine contact with non-human intelligences rather than simple hallucinations or equipment malfunctions. This possibility raises disturbing questions about the nature of reality and humanity's place within larger cosmic hierarchies. If invisible entities surround us constantly, observing our activities and potentially influencing human affairs, the implications for everything from religion to national security become staggering. Military applications of such technology would be simultaneously invaluable and incredibly dangerous. The ability to detect hidden enemies, identify concealed weapons, or monitor battlefield conditions through non-visible electromagnetic signatures could provide decisive tactical advantages. But if the same technology also reveals hostile non-human entities, the psychological cost might outweigh any strategic benefits. Decades after these alleged experiments, fundamental questions remain unanswered. Did the red spectrum goggles actually exist, or do these accounts represent embellished versions of documented night vision problems? Were the supernatural encounters genuine contact with otherworldly entities, or elaborate hallucinations triggered by toxic chemical exposure and extreme stress? The truth may be lost forever in classified military archives that will never see public release. Personnel involved in experimental programs often sign non-disclosure agreements that remain binding throughout their entire lifetimes. Official records of failed or dangerous experiments frequently get destroyed or buried so deeply that researchers can never access them. What we do know is that the psychological trauma experienced by soldiers using experimental optical devices was absolutely real, regardless of its ultimate cause. Men who underwent these experiences carried the memories for the rest of their lives, forever changed by whatever they encountered in the enhanced darkness of a distant war. Their testimonies serve as sobering reminders that technological progress sometimes comes with prices we never intended to pay. In our quest to gain advantages over human enemies, we may have accidentally opened doorways to conflicts we're not prepared to fight. Today's military forces use night vision technology that has advanced far beyond the crude devices tested in Vietnam. Modern systems provide clear, detailed images with minimal psychological side effects, allowing troops to operate effectively in complete darkness without the disorientation and hallucinations that plagued earlier equipment. But the fundamental questions raised by these historical accounts remain relevant. As we develop increasingly sophisticated sensors capable of detecting previously invisible phenomena, what else might we discover lurking in the hidden spectrums of reality? Are we prepared for the possibility that enhanced perception might reveal truths about our universe that human minds aren't equipped to handle? The convergence of military necessity, experimental technology, and toxic chemicals created conditions in Vietnam where soldiers encountered horrors beyond conventional explanation. Whether those experiences represented glimpses into hidden dimensions or simply the tragic consequences of dangerous experimentation, they remind us that some doors, once opened, can never be completely closed again. The men who looked through those experimental lenses and saw demons staring back have carried that knowledge with them ever since, forever changed by a moment when the boundaries between science and supernatural horror dissolved entirely. Their stories serve as warnings about the prices we pay when human curiosity pushes beyond the comfortable limits of ordinary perception into realms where nightmares might be waiting to become real. Some mysteries are meant to stay buried in classified files and fading memories. The soldiers who glimpsed hell through crimson lenses carried that burden home, forever knowing that reality's edges are thinner than we imagine. In our rush toward technological supremacy, we must remember, not every door should be opened. If you liked this video, good. That means you saw what they saw. But if you felt that chill down your spine, maybe your eyes aren't lying? Maybe you've already seen too much.